At 37,000 feet above the endless stretch of the Atlantic Ocean, passengers aboard Flight 908 settled comfortably into what they believed would be just another peaceful journey across continents. The cabin hummed with the familiar low vibration of the Boeing 787's engines, a steady sound that usually lulled travelers into a sense of calm. Children slept with their heads resting on their parents' shoulders, business professionals tapped quietly on laptops, and a few tourists flipped through travel magazines, daydreaming about adventures waiting for them on the other side. Everything was serene, ordinary, and predictable. Even the flight attendants moved with relaxed precision, serving warm meals, pouring drinks, and exchanging small smiles with passengers who thanked them. But deep inside the cockpit, something far from ordinary was beginning to unfold, something that would turn this routine flight into a story the world would remember for years. The captain, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, was in the middle of discussing weather conditions with the co-pilot when his hand suddenly froze mid-air. A sharp pain struck his chest, his breath caught, and before he could utter a single word, he collapsed onto the controls. The aircraft jerked downward sharply, throwing the co-pilot forward. Shocked, the co-pilot tried to regain control of the yoke, but within seconds his vision blurred, his body weakened, and he too slumped over his seat. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit, alarms shrilled through the control panels, and the steady hum of the engines turned into a deep, unsettling vibration as the Boeing 787 began to drift off its flight path. In the cabin, passengers felt the sudden drop, drinks spilled, overhead bins rattled, and conversations halted mid-sentence. Fear rose instantly. Some passengers clutched their armrests, others looked around with wide eyes, trying to understand what had just happened. A mother grabbed her child tighter, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart," though she wasn't sure of it herself. Within seconds, the flight attendants, trained to stay calm even in chaos, rushed toward the cockpit. They knocked rapidly, calling out for the pilots, but no response came. When they finally used their emergency access procedure to unlock the door, what they saw turned their blood cold. Both pilots were unconscious, completely unresponsive, and the aircraft was slightly tilted, drifting in altitude, its alarms growing louder and more urgent. One attendant gasped, covering her mouth. Another immediately tried shaking the captain's shoulder, hoping he would wake up, but nothing changed. The realization hit all of them at once. There was no one left to fly the plane. Panic rippled quietly but powerfully among the crew. They exchanged quick, frightened glances, each trying to hide the fear rising in their throats. The captain and co-pilot both gone. The Boeing 787, a massive, complex aircraft requiring expert control, was now without a pilot, thousands of feet above the cold ocean. They needed help, and fast. One of the attendants, her mind racing through every emergency protocol she had learned, suddenly remembered something she had overheard earlier. A few hours before takeoff, a quiet teenage girl in seat 14A had mentioned aviation, something about flight simulators, aircraft controls, and training with her father. At the time, the attendant had smiled politely and assumed it was just a young girl's hobby. But now, with alarms screaming and the plane unstable, that memory felt like a lifeline. She sprinted back into the cabin, her voice trembling but loud enough to catch attention. "Does anyone here have flying experience? Any at all?" Her words echoed through the aircraft. People looked around desperately, shaking their heads. Fear grew heavier in the air. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, a hand lifted from seat 14A. It belonged to a 17-year-old girl, small, quiet, with a calmness that didn't match the chaos around her. She stood up hesitantly, brushing her hair behind her ear, her heart pounding but her face composed. Her name was Aisha. She had boarded the flight alone, earbuds in, keeping to herself the way many teenagers do. No one had imagined that this seemingly shy girl would soon hold the fate of nearly 300 passengers in her hands. When she stepped into the aisle, nervous murmurs rose around her. Some passengers stared with disbelief, others with hope. The flight attendant reached her and asked, "Can you help? Do you know anything about flying?" Aisha swallowed hard. I've trained on advanced simulators," she said softly. "My dad is a flight instructor. I know the basics more than the basics." Her voice trembled, but her eyes showed something important determination. With no other option, the crew guided her toward the cockpit. Her steps were slow but steady, her mind racing with everything her father had taught her over the years. Emergency procedures, engine controls, communication protocols, and most importantly, mindset required to fly under pressure. When she entered the cockpit, the flashing red lights illuminated her face, casting shadows that made her look both young and incredibly brave. She glanced at the unconscious pilots, then at the overwhelming panel of switches, levers, screens, and blinking warning indicators. The cockpit felt suffocatingly warm, the alarms deafening. But Aisha inhaled deeply, sat in the captain's seat, and placed her hands on the controls as if she had done it 1,000 times. She took a shaky breath and reached for the radio controls. "Mayday, mayday, this is Flight 908. Both pilots are unconscious. I repeat, both pilots are unconscious." Her voice cracked but stayed steady enough to transmit clearly. This is a passenger taking control of the aircraft." For a moment, all she heard was static. Then a calm, firm voice responded. "Flight 908, this is air traffic control. We read you. Stay calm. Identify yourself and confirm you are in the cockpit." She wiped sweat from her forehead. "My name is Aisha. I'm 17. I have simulator training but no license. I'm at the controls." A pause. Then the voice returned, even steadier than before. "Aisha, listen carefully. We're going to help you. You're not alone. You can do this." The words hit her like a wave of reassurance. She adjusted the seat, placed her trembling hands back on the yoke, and focused on the instruments. The aircraft was descending slightly off course, but nothing beyond recovery. She could fix this if she stayed calm. Behind her, the flight attendants watched with a mixture of fear and awe. No one spoke, no one moved. Everyone understood the gravity of what was happening. In seat 14 sat a quiet teenager. But in the cockpit, surrounded by alarms and red lights, sat the person who now carried the lives of 289 passengers. Aisha inhaled deeply again, pushing aside her fear. The calm girl who once watched planes take off from airport fences with her father was gone. In her place was someone stepping into the role of a pilot, whether she was ready or not. And in that moment, with the aircraft trembling and the world watching through radar screens, her story truly began. Her name was Aisha, a shy 17-year-old girl traveling alone for the very first time. And until this moment she had blended into the background of the flight like a whisper, quiet, polite, unnoticed. She had spent most of the journey with her headphones on, glancing occasionally out the window at the endless ocean below, never imagining that fate was silently guiding her toward the cockpit of a Boeing 787. But unlike most passengers her age, Aisha carried a secret world inside her. One built from years of training in advanced flight simulators, countless afternoons spent in airfields with her father, and long nights studying aircraft manuals for fun. Her father, a seasoned flight instructor, had introduced her to aviation before she could even ride a bicycle. While other children played with dolls or video games, Aisha sat beside her father in small training aircraft, her feet barely reaching the pedals, her eyes lighting up each time the engine roared to life. She wasn't licensed, she wasn't a professional, and she had never flown anything close to the size or complexity of a Dreamliner. But she knew more about aviation systems than most adults ever would. Now, standing in the middle of a panicked cabin with hundreds of terrified eyes staring at her, that knowledge suddenly mattered more than anything. When the crew asked if anyone had flying experience and their voices cracked with desperation, Aisha's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Her hands shook violently, her throat tightened, and the logical part of her brain whispered, "This is too big, too dangerous, too impossible." But another voice, quiet, steady, and strangely calm, rose inside her, the voice that had always carried her through practice flights and simulator challenges, the voice her father had nurtured for years. And so, despite her trembling legs, she took a breath and stepped forward. The attendants looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. No one expected the savior of Flight 908 to be a teenage girl with a backpack and headphones still hanging around her neck. But they had no choice. Time was slipping away, alarms were still screaming from the cockpit, and the aircraft, enormous, heavy, and unforgiving, needed someone at the controls now. As the attendants guided her through the narrow aisle toward the cockpit, passengers whispered prayers, covered their mouths, or watched her with wide, fearful eyes. Aisha kept her gaze forward, trying to swallow the hurricane twisting inside her chest. The cockpit door felt heavier than she expected when she pushed it open, and the moment she stepped inside, the sight hit her with full force. Both pilots lay slumped over, unconscious, their headsets dangling. The glowing control panels blinked red, displaying warnings she had only ever seen in simulation scenarios. The cockpit smelled like metal, warm electronics, and faint cologne from the captain reminding her that these were real people, real pilots, not computer-generated characters she could reset with a button. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stay upright. The attendants helped her gently pull the pilots back from the seats. She felt the weight of their bodies, the frightening stillness in them, and the moment she placed them against the bulkhead, a cold shiver ran down her spine. This is real, this is happening. For a moment she froze. The Boeing 787 cockpit was a maze rows of illuminated switches, overlapping screens, throttle levers, overhead systems, navigation instruments, autopilot modules, and dozens of indicators she had only ever practiced on in a simulated environment. Now they were all glowing at her at once, like a test she had never studied for yet somehow already knew by heart. She took the captain's seat, her fingers brushing over the leather armrests worn from years of experienced hands. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, but she curled them into fists and inhaled deeply until the shaking slowed. She remembered what her father always said during practice flights: a good pilot is not the one who never feels fear, but the one who keeps thinking clearly despite fear. So she tried to think. First stabilize herself, then stabilize the plane. She scanned the primary flight display, altitude slightly off but recoverable. The attitude indicator showed a small tilt but not a dangerous one. Engine RPM steady. The aircraft was shouting for help, but it was still fully flyable. Her fear slowly transformed not into confidence but into focus. She adjusted the headset on her ears, her fingers fumbling slightly, and reached for the radio controls. She hesitated just for a second. Her heart thudded in her ears. Talking to air traffic control felt like stepping into a world she had only watched from afar, a world belonging to real pilots, not a 17-year-old girl who still struggled with math homework. Some days, but people were depending on her. Lives, hundreds of them, were now tied to every breath she took. She pressed the transmit button. Her voice came out softer than she wanted, shaky but surprisingly steady underneath the fear. "Mayday, mayday," she began, hoping she remembered the correct phrasing. "This is passenger Aisha. Both pilots are unconscious. I have control of the aircraft." Silence followed, a long stretch of static so loud it made her stomach tighten. What if they didn't hear her? What if she had pressed the wrong switch? What if she was already too late? Then a calm voice crackled through the headset, steady and reassuring, like the voice of someone who had guided frightened pilots through emergencies before. "Passenger Aisha, this is the nearest control center. We hear you loud and clear. Confirm you are seated at the controls." She swallowed hard, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. "Yes, I'm in the captain's seat. I have simulator experience and basic flight training, but nothing like this." Another pause, then the voice responded with a firmness that steadied her shaking breath. "Aisha, listen carefully. We are with you. We will guide you step by step. You are not alone." She nodded instinctively, even though no one could see her. For the first time since stepping into the cockpit, A thin thread of confidence wound itself around her fear. She placed her hands on the yoke, her fingers trembling but determined, and stared at the horizon line glowing softly on the display. The unimaginable had happened. A shy teenage girl, unnoticed moments earlier, now sat in the command seat of a Boeing 787, responsible for hundreds of souls at 37,000 feet. And despite the storm of fear inside her, despite the weight of the impossible situation, she whispered to herself, just loud enough to hear it over the alarms, "I can do this." Air traffic control guided her through every step, speaking slowly, clearly, and with the calm authority of people who understood the gravity of every word they said. "Aisha, stabilize your altitude, keep your nose level, adjust your throttle by 2%. Each instruction came like a lifeline thrown across the sky, and Aisha clung to every syllable as though it were the only thing keeping the giant aircraft from falling apart. Her fingers tightened around the yoke until her knuckles turned white, and every muscle in her arms felt stretched to its breaking point. Yet she didn't hesitate, she didn't break. She did exactly what they told her, even when her body trembled and fear scraped at the edges of her composure. But just as she managed to bring the aircraft into a more stable flight path, the sky ahead shifted into a roaring wall of turbulence, unexpected, violent, and merciless. Without warning, the Boeing 787 plunged sharply, then jerked up again, as if caught in the fist of an unseen giant. Passengers screamed, luggage inside open bins rattled like falling debris, a drink cart crashed sideways, spilling water and metal cups across the aisle. The lights flickered, and a collective gasp filled the cabin as the entire aircraft shuddered violently. Inside the cockpit, the turbulence hit with even greater force. The yoke slammed in her hands, shaking so hard it felt like it might rip free. Aisha's arms strained, her shoulders burning as she pulled with every ounce of strength she had. It was like wrestling a machine 1,000 times stronger than she was. The aircraft tilted left, alarms blared, and the horizon on her display rolled dangerously off-center. But Aisha didn't let go. She gritted her teeth, eyes locked on the glowing instruments as her headset crackled with the urgent voice of air traffic control. "Aisha, maintain your heading, fight the roll, keep it steady." She tried, God, she tried. The cockpit seemed to vibrate around her, the panels trembling under the force of the turbulent winds. Her hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, her breath came fast, shallow, and uneven, but she kept moving, small corrections, tiny adjustments, each one battling the storm outside. "You're doing good, Aisha." The controller's voice encouraged, steadying her shaking nerves. "Stay with it, small inputs, don't overcorrect." She focused on those words. Small inputs. Her father had taught her that to never fight the plane harder than necessary. Guide it, don't wrestle it. The turbulence roared like thunder around the fuselage, but she began making controlled, precise motions on the yoke. Inch by inch, the aircraft responded. Slowly, almost painfully slowly, the attitude indicator crept back toward level. Her arms ached, her palms stung with the friction of the controls, but she didn't stop, she wouldn't stop. Behind her, flight attendants clung to the cockpit doorframe, staring in awe as this 17-year-old girl, who minutes ago seemed like any other passenger, fought one of the most advanced commercial aircraft in the world through a violent storm. Each second felt like a minute, each minute felt like an hour. The turbulence tossed the plane one last time, a massive jolt that sent several passengers crying out. Then silence, the shaking eased, the horizon steadied, the Boeing 787, under the trembling hands of a teenage girl, leveled out. Aisha let out a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. Her shoulders sagged slightly with relief, but she didn't let go of the yoke. She didn't dare, not yet. You did it. The controller said softly in her headset, altitude stable, heading stable. Aisha, you're flying the aircraft. Flying it. She was flying it, not in a simulator, not in her father's lightweight training plane, not in some imagined scenario. This was real, terrifyingly real. She blinked rapidly, her eyes blurring with a mix of sweat and tears she refused to let fall. Behind her in the cabin, a stillness spread through the air. Passengers who had screamed moments earlier now sat frozen, breathless, staring at the seatbelt signs as though waiting for them to flicker reassurance. Some clutched hands, some whispered prayers, and some simply looked toward the cockpit with the desperate hope that the person inside was capable of leading them to safety. And she had to be. Aisha didn't think of herself as a hero. She didn't think of herself as brave. She felt like a girl who had been thrown into an impossible situation with no warning, but now, with the plane stable, she understood something with sudden clarity: there was no one else. No backup pilot, no hidden expert, no miracle waiting in the wings. She was it. She carried the lives of all 289 souls on board, babies sleeping in their mothers' arms, elderly passengers clutching the hands of loved ones, families returning home, students traveling abroad, strangers sitting beside each other with their fears rising and falling together. They were all counting on her, trusting her, depending on her. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like gravity had doubled, yet it didn't crush her. It strengthened her. She tightened her grip on the controls, steadier now, her breathing returning to rhythm. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind: the plane wants to fly. Trust it, trust yourself. Air traffic control continued giving instructions, but now their tone had changed, not frantic, not tentative, but respectful. They treated her not as a child, but as the pilot she had become in the most unexpected way. Aisha, maintain your current speed and heading. We're preparing a priority landing path for you. You're doing exceptionally well. Those words made her chest tighten again, this time not with fear, but with something close to pride. She nodded firmly, even though they couldn't see her, and responded, "Copy that." Two simple words, spoken with a strength she didn't know she had. Behind her, the storm clouds slowly thinned, revealing a soft band of golden light on the horizon as the aircraft glided forward once more. The passengers didn't know the details of what was happening inside the cockpit, didn't know how close disaster had come, but they felt the change. They felt the stability. The screaming stopped, the whispers quieted. Many turned their tear-filled eyes toward the front of the plane, realizing that someone somehow had saved them from falling through the sky. And that someone was a 17-year-old girl who, moments earlier, had been nothing more than a quiet traveler lost in her own thoughts. Now she was something else entirely: a leader, a fighter, a lifeline, a pilot in every way that mattered. And as she guided the massive aircraft forward, her hands steady at last, she understood with certainty that she would carry these lives, every single one of them, safely to the ground. As the plane approached the runway, visibility dropped so suddenly it felt like the world had vanished behind a curtain of fog and wind. The glowing city lights that had given her comfort minutes earlier disappeared into a gray blur, leaving only the dim runway indicators blinking faintly through the haze. The Boeing 787 trembled as strong crosswinds slammed into its massive wings, each gust pushing the aircraft sideways with enough force to make even seasoned pilots nervous. This was the hardest part of any flight landing. But landing a giant 787 in rough weather, with nearly 300 lives behind her and no professional flight experience, was something far beyond hard. It was an act of courage few people would ever face. Her heart pounded so violently she felt it shake her entire chest, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, letting every inhale and exhale anchor her. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, soft but unwavering: "Trust the aircraft, trust yourself. A plane can feel your fear, but it can also feel your strength." She tightened her grip on the yoke, her palms sweaty, her fingers stiff from the constant tension. Air traffic control spoke calmly in her headset, guiding her step by step, but she understood one painful truth: the final moments of a landing were up to the pilot. Her, the girl who had never even driven a car on a highway. now responsible for landing one of the world's most advanced commercial aircraft. She glanced at the altimeter, descending fast but on track. The runway alignment indicator wavered left and right with the crosswinds, but she corrected the drift with small, precise motions just like her father had taught her. "You're doing well, Aisha," the controller's voice said gently. "Hold your approach. Keep your nose steady." She didn't respond. She couldn't. She was too focused. She reached down and flipped the landing gear lever. The heavy metal thump echoed through the aircraft as the wheels descended and locked in place. Then she adjusted the flaps to increase lift and stability, her movements careful, deliberate, almost instinctive. Her breath caught in her throat as the runway finally appeared long, narrow, and faint beneath the fog. The winds howled against the fuselage, rattling the cockpit walls, but she didn't let them intimidate her. She nudged the throttle gently, slowing the aircraft just enough for a controlled descent. "Steady, steady," she whispered to herself, though she didn't even realize she was speaking. At 200 feet, the plane shook violently again. A sharp gust pushed the right wing upward, tilting the aircraft dangerously. Passengers gasped and clutched each other. Flight attendants braced themselves against the walls. In the cockpit, Aisha fought against the force with everything she had, pulling left, leveling the wings, adjusting the pitch. Her arms burned, her shoulders screamed in pain, but she pushed through it. She had come too far to lose control now. The ground rushed toward them 100 feet, 80, 60. The instruments beeped rapid warnings, but Aisha kept her mind focused and clear. She aligned the nose with the center line of the runway, making corrections every second. The wind tried to steal the plane away, but she refused to let it. At 30 feet, she pulled back gently on the yoke, initiating the flare. The engines roared in response, the aircraft slowing, the massive wheels inches from the ground. This is it, she thought, this is everything. Then impact, hard, jarring, teeth rattling. The wheels hit the runway with a loud thud that reverberated through the entire plane. The Boeing 787 bounced once, then settled heavily onto the asphalt. Tires screeched, the wings shook. The cabin filled with gasps and cries, but they were down, they were safe. Aisha engaged the reverse thrusters, her heart racing like a drum as the plane slowed rapidly. The runway lights passed on either side, streaking like fireflies through the fog. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the aircraft rolled to a stop. Silence filled the cabin, silence so profound it was as if the whole world held its breath. Then, slowly at first, a cheer rose from the passengers. It grew louder, swelling into applause, sobs of relief, shouts of joy, and grateful cries that echoed from one end of the plane to the other. People hugged strangers, parents kissed their children. Some wept openly, unable to contain the overwhelming relief of surviving something they never imagined they would endure. In the cockpit, Aisha sat frozen for a moment, staring at the instruments as her hands trembled uncontrollably. She had done it. She had truly done it. Not in a simulator, not under supervision, not in practice, but in the real world, under pressure no teenager should ever face. Air traffic control congratulated her, their voices full of disbelief and admiration. Emergency vehicles rushed toward the aircraft. Medics boarded quickly to attend to the unconscious pilots, lifting them gently and carrying them away for treatment. The flight attendants gathered near the cockpit threshold, watching Aisha with awe shining in their eyes. She removed her headset slowly, her breath still shaky, her mind barely processing what had just happened. Standing felt impossible, but she forced her legs to move, rising from the captain's seat, the seat she had filled better than anyone could have expected. When she stepped out of the cockpit, the cabin erupted again in claps and cheers. Faces turned toward her, faces filled with gratitude, wonder, and tears. A few people reached out to touch her shoulder, others pressed their hands together in thanks. She felt overwhelmed, shy, and unsure of how to respond. She had never been the center of attention in her life. She had been the quiet girl in seat 14A. the girl who kept to herself, who loved planes, who listened more than she spoke. But now she stood as something completely different, not a quiet passenger, not an unnoticed teenager, but a hero, a real hero. The shy girl in seat 14A was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, braver, and forever changed. A young woman who saved 289 lives at 17 years old.